Welcome to California Unfiltered. McKenna Blackman and Daniel Silvas, proud Californians with conservative values, dive into the Golden State's latest news, laws, and national stories. No fluff, no filter, just raw, honest takes on how these issues impact you. Tune in for truth, laughs, and bold perspectives. Let's get started.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and start with AB 84. Daniel, go ahead and introduce us to that.
Hey, how's it going, McKenna? And hello to everybody. My name is Daniel Silva. So we're here to talk about a couple of issues affecting all Californians. And the first one we want to talk about is AB 84. So for the average Californian parent that are unaware, no one knows what the swamp in Sacramento is doing. But to give a brief, description of AB 84, it's an attack on California's homeschooling, private charter schools, and private schools altogether, as well as attacking as the small businesses that provide services to them. So it's not just attacking the parents, the private school, but it's attacking all their partners essentially. Me as a California parent, I'm pissed off about that. How you feel about that, McKenna?
Well, I went to a charter school. So, my sophomore, junior, and senior year of high school, I went to a charter school. So it kind of hits home for me. If it wasn't for the going to charter school, I did college prep and independent study, through a charter school here in Temecula, and it helped me get to college. So if I didn't do it, I probably would have not made it to college. So this bill prohibits, essentially school districts from growing private and charter schools. So, which I'm totally against blocking that. I think these are the type of schools that really help the students that, like me, actually, that struggle with math and the English and all that. So,
I agree. So ultimately, this goes down to Sacramento's overreach in parental rights,
yes.
and they're attacking families throughout up and down California. And most importantly, what they want to do is make it so difficult and so hard to find a private, a charter, et cetera, school, a school choice per se, away from public school. They want to attack them. And I guarantee you that the reason they want to do that because they want to force kids back into public school. And if a lot of parents don't know, in recent years, in the last 2 years, there's been a decline in school attendance and public school attendance up and down the state. So what's been
Yes.
happening, the greater trend is that a lot of families and parents are choosing for their kids to not go to a public school. Why? Because the public school has failed families throughout California. California is in the bottom five in the whole country, United States of America, in education scores and testing and attendance. So I think this is a greater, summarization of the greater problem at hand. What you think, McKenna?
Well, California used to be one of the top states in education. I wasn't born in California. I was born in Hawaii. So my parents, I remember them telling me they moved back to California and specifically Marietta Temecula area because of the schools, because of the test scores as well. But as we've kind of progressed and more recently, test numbers have gone down. Students aren't testing well on the STAs and ACTs. Um, so it's kind of we have to look at what our education system is right now, and our education system is failing. So I think we need a lot of reform in that department. I mean, we need a lot of reform everywhere in the states, freaking California, yeah.
Yes.
But education is one of the most important things. It helps you determine what you. But I want to remind everyone that Newsom's kids are in private schools,
Yes.
so why are we pushing so hard for public schools? Is it because they want to say it's more affordable, or it's I think it's just because they want to indoctrinate certain things, and under the charter and like the private schools they don't have much control over that. So, and also public schools are more impacted, they are more saturated, so kids get lost in the system. I know I did growing up. I was lost and all of that, and like I was saying earlier, I really struggled in school. So I think charter schools are very, very beneficial. Private schools as well.
Yes, so you said it right there very importantly. Public schools right now, they don't teach kids no more.
No,
I know damn well they don't.
it's just to push them along.
They're so busy indoctrinating kids, and putting in their minds things that are not necessarily education, but social conditioning, indoctrination, making them fall in line and become, instead of be critical thinkers, become yes people in society, and to not question authority. What do you think about that?
You're trying to put a square into a circle hole. That's what it is. That's what. No one's the same. No one thinks the same. I have a different way of learning. I'm more kinesthetic, in my form of learning. In a lot of ways, public school teachers want to put all these kids into one bubble and make them learn a certain way, their way, which not prohibits, but it stifles kids. Um, and it makes them not want to go to school. It makes them not want to learn because, like, well, I can't do this because I don't think this way. And teachers are so unwilling to help. Um, it, you have kids that are failing. You have kids that are dropping out of school or not going to college and all that. So,
Yeah, so and that's another issue at hand, right? Is that a lot of kids are being left behind,
yep.
in regarding education. And if they don't check the box of what a quote unquote a perfect California student is, they ultimately get left behind. What California education should go back and focusing is teaching trades at high school level, getting
Hmm.
these kids ready for the real life. And that's the thing. A lot of kids are in college right now. They're going to college for a degree that might not even be there in 10 years from now or 5 years from now, in danger of being extinct by AI, automation, changing the technology. So these are real world issues that we must address, and the state of California must address.
Yes. Schools, from what I know, aren't teaching the home ec and the auto classes and the wood shop and all the classes that you need to learn or should be learning, to live, the average American life.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's the average American life. You should learn how to, about cars and, putting things together and taking things apart and how a home works. What's wrong with that? I feel like they're pushing down the tech, the STEM so hard that I don't know just statistic wise, but I want to say at least half of students. Now, don't hold that against me because I don't have the exact numbers, but I believe it's half of students don't want to go into STEM and the technology and the medical. And there's a good number of kids who want to learn a trade, who want to go into, construction, plumbing, which is the backbone of America. So,
A lot of things that they don't want to talk about or inform families or kids is that actually electricians,
yep.
plumbing, HVAC, mechanic, and diesel mechanic, anything, all the above, they're
Mhm.
all highly paid and sought out careers and positions that are real world solutions of real world problems that pay really
Yes.
well. And we need to make these choices for kids available at high schools.
Yes.
Again, that's all my opinion. And I'll tell you something else that's another horrible bill that all Californians should know about, and that's AB 495. That's a
Yeah.
horrible bill. You want to hit the T off that, McKenna?
Yeah, so AB 495 is, what is it called? There's a name for it. I'm not remembering it right now. It is the Family Preparedness Plan Act. I just pulled it up, of 2025. So that essentially, just to kind of summarize it, it allows stranger adults to take kids from their parents if they deem that parent is unfit to care for their child. Is that correct?
Wow, one that's horrible. So not only I got to worry about the public school system indoctrinating our children, my kids, but now I got to worry about some stranger danger coming to school and potentially taking my kid away from me. And these are things that should draw the red line among all Californians. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party, et cetera. This is an issue that should affect and all California parents should know about, and we all should be outraged. What do you think?
Yeah, no, definitely. We all really should be speaking out against this. Uh, the author of the bill said it's supposed to protect migrant children, but according to Republicans, nowhere in that bill, and I've also read it over, nowhere in that bill does it state that it addresses the migrant issue with, deportations and all that stuff. What this bill does, it affects American citizens, children, minors as well. So it makes it a lot easier for predators to operate in our plain sight by using the law. We'll say, and I even brought this up too to the Mayor of Vista, who I work for part time. I was like, well, what about SVPs? And I'm sure we're going to be talking about this in our interview today as well. Um, SVPs who are getting released, they're like, oh, well, under this law now, I can take a child and I can have them for mine own will.
I think the issue with the bill, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with me, is that it's the language in the bill.
Yes.
So these the super majority in Sacramento, they're saying it protects migrants from whatever reason they have to say, right? But the language of the bill is different from what they're telling the voter. So the language in the bill does not have the necessary terms, names that put limits on who or what could take the kids out of the school. They're saying it's to help protect migrants, but they left very important words in the bill that specifically states important facts such as that. Or what are the boundaries, the red limits, or what you cannot do, what they cannot do. And that's the issue with this bill. I recommend, and I hope that the state California Senate, all right, the 40 in Sacramento, or so, they get to ultimately reject this bill altogether and put it back in the drawing board and make a better one. That's or if it passes the state senate, have Democrat Gavin Newsom to veto the bill.
Yeah.
And I think all Californians should know of these horrendous bills.
No, definitely. And I want to mention, because I was just looking this up while you're talking too, these are the points that it talks about. So let me go ahead and go through this. One, it expands who qualifies as a caregiver. So what that means, it includes non-relative extended family members, which is defined as any adult with an established familial or mentoring relationship with a child. So you can easily make it up too if you know this child, right? Next, it also authorizes the use of a caregiver's authorizations, a deviat, by these individuals, allowing them to assume decision-making authority over a child's schooling, medical care, without a court appearance, notarization, or parental signature. Again, someone can just make up their relation to this said child. It also grants caregivers the legal ability to enroll a child in school, which means it authorizes medical, dental, and mental health treatments, including treatments related to school participation. This includes sex trait modification procedures. I will also want to mention it does not require schools or daycare facilities to verify identity. Does not include daycare schools. It does not require schools and daycares to verify a person's identity, which is a serious issue.
That's a red flag. That's a serious red flag right there.
And then lastly, it requires court documents related to joint guardianship agreements. What that means, it does not require you to disclose the paperwork and the documentation.
All that language in that you just read, it's included in the bill. In case the average Californian does not know, all that language you say is in the bill. So what Sacramento do, they put these long, confusing words in there, all this mumbo jumbo, just to confuse the Californian voter. Kind of scenario like, oh, we're smarter than you, leave us alone, we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
We Californians must always be vigilant and be on the lookout what Sacramento would the Democrat supermajority want to keep pressing and passing bill in Sacramento? And I know I know someone here that has a lot to say about it. I believe our special guest, right, Peter Hernandez, who we
Yep.
want to introduce to our audience right here, right?
Alrighty.
So I'll let the audience get to know Peter Hernandez, who's a great individual who ran for Congress. He's going to be running for his area, San Benito County Supervisor.
Yes. All right, so we have today with us Peter Hernandez. So, Peter, go ahead and start with who you are, where you're from, and let's talk about your county and everything like that.
Sounds good. Thanks, McKenna. Thank you, Daniel, for having me. So yeah, I'm a native of San Benito County, former elected county supervisor. Actually, have been in politics for a little bit over a decade. Roughly 13 years. Served also on the Hollister School District Board. Ran for Congress for 2 cycles. Pretty passionate about not so much just politics, but the reality of the implications of what government has done or been involved in our lives. I'm raised in an agricultural community, Hispanic majority. I actually come from an immigrant family. I know there's a lot of hot takes on illegal immigration. My family was illegal at one point in time, but I've learned to love this country and understand the Constitution and why I think as Hispanics we need to be passionate about protecting the very thing that has given us not just so much freedom but blessings living in this nation. So that is the passion that I carry in running for office.
So, Daniel, go ahead. Yeah.
So, Peter, thank you for everything. Thank you for you've done everything in your past, and I'm pretty sure your community's happy and grateful for you. And I got a question for you, Peter. So,
Sure.
keeping in mind Newsom efforts to go after California school boards, what are your thoughts on his efforts to protect trans students, LGBTQ material in schools, which is pornographic books? Books should be of parental notification consent. Why is he so adamant on keeping sexual content in school libraries? Excuse me.
I think, the best way to describe Gavin Newsom is kind of like a parasite, and I don't mean to be insulting, but if you think about the nature of it, of his character, right? He seems to drift in and out of consciousness with his convictions, right? He has Charlie Kirk on his show trying to save face with the conservative the conservative Republican community, and or the MAGA community, as some would say, and trying to see if he can earn some support from them. But the reality is everything that he talks about when it comes to the issues, especially these very much social issues with the trans sentiment. He's not even real with himself, right? He made it seem like he was sentimental to a female losing in a sport unfairly, basically worked against her, right? With the way that they stack the deck with all these muscular men, right? These people that have obviously or individuals that have more strength, naturally talented, higher they have higher level of capacity when it comes to running or their ability to intake oxygen. Like there's all these things that just kind of skew their ability to lose to a woman, right, comparatively speaking. And that's not to say that the women aren't capable. It's just the reality that and ultimately you have women that they have their own sport, right? And you have men that have their own sport. There's no reason. But my point is Gavin Newsom just dances around the issues and he acts like he cares. He tries to play this almost like he's sentimental to LGBTQ community, but in reality, he doesn't have any real concern for them, and obviously all it's doing is hurting our children, the women in our communities and in our families, that are now, it's kind of peculiar that Gavin Newsom, technically speaking, is becoming more anti-feminist in that sense, right? It's like whatever happened to the pro-feminist movement, where you're preserving women's rights. Now you're actually stripping them of it. But obviously now, because it's a new, he's playing from a different deck now, right? It's a new day and age where the trans sentiment has become popularized or politicized, for that matter, and it's taken away basically really any sanity, and it starts to permeate in other things, right? In our parental rights, right? And all of a sudden we're having issues with with boys and women's bathrooms, and the potential for, you've seen that even in the prison systems where women get raped, right, because a male claims to be trans. It's obviously, um, it just creates this confusion legally, and by default it's allowed for abuse of that system because of the confusion.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I feel like he's jumping back and forth because he wants to run for president. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But that's really, I think, the only goal is he wants to come off moderate. Just kind of keeping in mind, protecting our children. I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm about to speak on something in October about keeping these sexually explicit books out of schools because it's warping our 5, 6, 7 year olds minds that they shouldn't be exposed to that. But that kind of leads me to my next question about AB 495, I believe it is. Essentially what it is, it's allowing strangers to take children away from, I guess, parents that they believe, just to kind of put it into, to dumb it down a little bit, they believe are not fit to care for their children. The author of the bill, I forget who it is at the moment, but she claims this bill is aimed to protect children of illegal immigrants, but really it doesn't, because Republicans argue that there's nowhere in the bill that it states that. So, what is your thoughts on AB 495? Um, what are your thoughts about Republicans, kind of coming out against it?
Well, obviously, I support coming out against it, and it kind of gets to McKenna, to the Democrat or the progressive left playbook, right? It's kind of this postmodern culture where they destroy norms established by for hundreds of years or thousands of years, I should say. Where the distinctions between male and female. But bottom line is, confusion breeds contempt. It really is an opportunist attitude. I've seen it as a local elected. A lot of the times they, you know, um, and I mentioned this to Daniel at one point in time. The reality is anytime they write policy, their intention is to create ambiguity, broad, broad definitions that are easier to manipulate in what the that terminology is intended to actually do. And they want that, right? Because technically speaking, they know the game. It is a game to them. So they'll write a law, they'll make it ambiguous, they'll make it hard to understand. The average person, when they see what's happening, like us, that want to challenge it, we have to have a fat pocketbook with a lot of attorneys to be able to pick a fight, to raise money or to pick this fight, and to protect our children. We can't do it. It makes it very, very hard, right? So AB 495, they needed it to be vague, right? Because the reality is it should be a pro-trafficking bill, or defined as a pro-trafficking bill, and it should be by default some form of federal violation. I would argue even treasonous in that sense, because you're basically writing a law, making it legal in California to violate the federal constitution as it pertains to immigration. So it's intentional that they're doing this. I'm surprised. I mean, it's almost like a nullification law if you think about it, right? Nullification is intentional, that it tries to nullify federal laws statewide. So you have one state doing different than what the federal government requires. Yet they forget, or maybe they don't know, or maybe they don't read their constitution, that every state has to be ratified into this federal government, into the union. They basically have to support the supremacy clause of the Constitution. The Constitution requires that when it comes to federal matters, that the federal government has supremacy. And so here they are basically trying to play these games, and they know that this is a political football. It's an emotional football. It's a public football, right? So which means whoever has the biggest dog in the fight, which is going to be the public that supports these individuals to try to push this forward, they're depending on that political emotion to drive the conversation. That's an insult, right? Because the more that this is why you guys are so important, to be honest, with your show. Like I know Latino Free Minds and Real United and other folks that really are involved in this space to really start to articulate clearly on the kind of the insidious, divisive elements of what they're doing, and calling them out, so that way more people know, and that way less people become supportive of what they're doing.
And if
Yes.
I could, before Dan, I just had a thought real quick, if you don't mind. Um, it was making me think about the SVPs, sexually violent predators, who are
Mm,
being early released from prison. Um, what does this mean for them? Because if, let's say, this bill went into law,
yep.
what would this mean for, maybe this doesn't have a connection, but if it does, what would this mean for SVPs who are now free, walking free? Does this mean they're getting off scot-free? Does it make sense what I'm trying to say? Like, what does
Yeah.
this mean regarding that?
So yeah, so there's a lot of things intermixed, and you're 100% accurate. I actually appreciate you bringing that up because it reminded me AB 109. Actually, when I first started my political career, I was volunteering at the probation department, and they dealt with AB 109, and that was a law that was called realignment. That basically, long and short, what it did is it handed what was used to be a state authority, because there was a court case, without getting too much in the weeds, that required that they basically decrease the prison population. And so they did these three non-sexual, non-violent, non-serious offenders. They had to release them from that prison. They had to come up with that, ultimately, that process to be able to take them out of the prison system, right? Some kind of a vetting process. But all it did is put that burden on the local governments. So think about the kind of the culmination of all these things coming together, where you have AB 495, AB 109, right? The state of California intentionally trying to decrease prison populations. Those individuals are out. They know that they're not going to be held accountable. All of a sudden, there's a law where they can, if they all of a sudden get this crazy, sexual drive in them to go out and want to start to take advantage of the system, they can start to now look for. They can become predators of school systems right at that point, and then before you know it, they're sexually molesting children without parents even knowing anything about it. And even worse, my understanding, the law actually forbids to release the information of whoever took that child out of that classroom, which means now you might even have kidnapping situations, right? So again, intentionally ambiguous. It's foolish, because what they're doing is they're going to end up hurting themselves. I firmly believe the Democrats are literally imploding on their own. Because of these foolish policies, because the idea that they have and the actual consequences, they're not going to feel it for a little bit, but once they feel it, I think the state of California, they almost like, maybe not intentionally so, but they're pushing us to have to vote red, obviously.
A lot of parents and independent groups consider AB 495 to be evil, essentially evil,
Percent
where
Yes.
criminals, predators, and any stranger, talk about real stranger danger to get your kids while school, while having your knowledge as a parent. Me, as a father of three daughters, that's major red flags.
Yeah.
And with many parents calling it evil, and in the state of California where it's a Democrat supermajority in Sacramento, how are conservatives and Republicans protecting children against trafficking and abusers, especially against AB 495? What are your thoughts on the current system, and how the state is currently handling children?
I mean, the state is too involved. I think the overall overarching issue is we've become, to a certain extent, authoritarian, right? I don't know how, I'm pretty sure you guys remember COVID, not too long ago, and if you think about the reality of the consequence, that for at least a year and a half we were technically under one man rule. Gavin Newsom had full control of this state under the emergency powers, right? Supposedly in his response of addressing this COVID virus. My point in saying that is, there, the moment that you give power at the top, it's disconnected from the bottom, right? It doesn't understand the daily lives, the daily struggles of all these different counties, rural, urban, right, suburban. So there's so many things happening. You need what was intentional from the founders of the Constitution, to have a bottom-up government where the locals were involved in the process, whether it comes to planning, distribution of resources, addressing issues, collecting taxes, making sure they're paying for ultimately for everything necessary for that city or county to run. But that's changed, right? You're seeing that a lot. Actually, that's part of the issues that we have in San Benito County. So we're losing our power, is my ultimate point. And that means that the state is taking more and more power upon itself. But what's worse is they're taking more power, but they're doing it in a way that that's stripping us of anything that they try to a certain extent, even if it's well intentioned, when they write a law, they're not even providing funding with any new laws that they implement. And I'm being general, right? Because I know there's probably laws that they do fund, but there's too many unfunded laws, or we call them unfunded mandates, as local electeds on the books. Unfunded mandates are basically laws that are required to be implemented, and people need to also understand. Uh, Local governments, city and county, right? We're administrative agencies for the state of California, technically. So Health and Human Services, Workforce Development, right? All these different agencies that are considered administrative agencies of the executive branch of the state of California, which is the governor's department. We're supposed to basically administer these laws, especially the county, right? Most counties are considered general law counties, which means we get pass through funds. Funds come to us. We basically oversee them, make sure they're spent right and directly and spent in what they're intended for, and we make sure that we have oversight over that spending. But when you're giving us money and then we just give it to the agency and that agency responds quicker to the state of California than they do to us, it just creates just havoc, because we're losing our power and ultimately control over our own communities. Our communities are falling apart, increases in poverty, increases in homelessness, right? All these issues are growing because I would argue the overarching issue, as you mentioned, and obviously our parental rights, right? They're getting more micromanaging about our daily lives, and they're destroying really us from being able to be involved in the process. One final point, I've argued this before with my local electeds. When I sat on the board of supervisors, I said, look, these guys write the laws, we implement them. And if they're bad laws, we get in trouble for them. Why? Because we're the closest to the people, right? Just the way the founders intended, we're the closest to the people, which means we're at the firing line if the people are saying, hey, what's going on? Why is my road falling apart? Why am I losing my parents' rights? All the local electeds do is point to the state of California and say, well, there's nothing we can do, the state says. But the worst reality, which no one talks about, is local electeds don't even bring up anything that would be considered state authority. So think about it. It's kind of like the church conversation, right? The church used to talk about a lot of things. Now it talks about less things because there's more government censorship over those things because they declare it now to become ultimately a government type process, right? LGBT conversations used to be more private conversations, right? Anything having to do with uh, any different type of relationship outside of natural marriage or man and woman marriage, like that used to be private conversations. Now the government says, no, that's our conversation. Well, now local electeds never talk about that. That's the same thing that's happening with all other laws. So local electeds don't bring those up. They don't address them. They leave them alone because if they bring them up, they're afraid that the state's going to slap their hand and tell them, no, 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 you can't do that because we said already, we wrote a law about that. And that's the insidious element of what's happening with our power, with ultimately the state of California.
Yeah, definitely. Things that shouldn't be politicized have been politicized. And I know that was a heavy topic that we're just kind of
Pretty
covering,
heavy.
but
Pretty
it
heavy.
is, but it's something that we need to bring light to. I used to be a nanny when I was in college, and so it kind of hits home for me. It's heartbreaking what our children in this state, and really in any state, are going through. But to kind of lift it up a little bit here, not very much, but lift it up a little bit here. Let's go ahead and talk about the economy in California. Uh, we have a huge deficit, as you know, as a lot of people know. We have a spending problem more than we do have a saving problem. We spend a lot. So, what are your thoughts on the current economic state of California? Is there any way we can bring back jobs to kind of help our economy?
California, it's been mentioned plenty of times. We're like the sixth greatest economy in the world, right? Not just in the nation. We produce a lot of revenue, so there's obviously a lot of movement economically happening here. There's just less actual benefit from that revenue because we're so heavily taxed, right? From property tax, sales tax, income tax, everything, right? I mean, you blink and you're being taxed on it. I'm a small business owner. That's my trade. You know, I own a small shop in downtown Hollister, Ohana Shave Ice. If you'd love to come and visit, I'd love to say hi. But my point is, I think everybody should have the opportunity to start business because once you do, you start to see what it means to create something and benefit from it, or and ultimately the regulations over it, and then you become more civically minded. You know I know that there's huge opportunities once people start to understand, and I do believe that the big beautiful bill is going to create a new middle class economy. I was going to bring up uh, Victor Davis Hanson, very profound man. He wrote The Dying Citizen. He basically highlights, I think, a very profound reality that the middle class, a strong middle class in a nation, literally cements the strength of that nation. When you have a strong middle class, they're earning revenue, they're creators, they're also protectors of that revenue. They're by default more vigilant, they're more civically minded, they're more engaged in what's happening in their local politics. They're obviously weighing in and making sure that their voice is heard. So they're by default becoming the measurement of the local, of the influence of the local community, because they know a lot. They know a lot about their business. They know how economy functions. And I do think Scott Bessent, President Trump, and what he's doing, what he's intentionally doing with the tariffs, trying to basically create an external revenue service where we're actually generating revenues from the federal government. I mean, I'm sorry, from other nations through the tariff process. And it's obviously also a leveraging tool to try to basically bring back, try to repatriate to a certain extent industries, things that people thought were impossible. I know that now the latest declaration from Tim Cook with Apple, basically try now there's certain things as far as the Apple phone that are going to start to be manufactured in the U.S. He's incentivized it. Um, that's going to create opportunities here. I mean, I don't know how many people have ever been through what once was called the steel belt, now is called the rust belt. Obviously, not in a positive light, because so many people have lost jobs. I mean, when you have a manufacturing base, you create a local economy out of it, right? You create restaurants all of a sudden start popping up, people starting to patronize. People have pretty secure jobs. They're making good income. They're spending money, not just locally, but they're by default creating jobs and extending that ability to create wealth to others. So, and then there's also the changing in the tax structure that I think is really profound. And this is the first year, I mean, obviously, after the big beautiful bill, where they've seen a decrease in government jobs and an increase in private sector jobs. So the actual bump in the economy has been 100% driven by the increase in the private sector and the incentivization. I mean, one of the things in the incentives that they created with the big beautiful bill had to do with 100% depreciation on capital investments. What that means is, if you're a business owner, you can spend money on something and you're going to be able to depreciate the whole thing. And if it's obviously it being in a piece of equipment, that piece of equipment is going to increase revenue or increase efficiency in your business. You're also going to basically have to have more staff to run that equipment. So you're going to hire more people, right? So there's all these kind of like external, or just snowball effect type benefits. That's the power of what it means to really change the dynamic, where now, again, what I mentioned with the prior question, where you're actually empowering the people, giving them back their power to ultimately direct the course of this economy, and ultimately create the benefits necessary for this, and it's national security. And that's the other part of it, right? If we're dependent on other nations, we learned this during COVID, right? Our supply chains were severely strained. We started realizing, oh my God, we need penicillin. And guess what? We're getting it from China. China all of a sudden gets ticked off at us. They can cut us off and then we're in trouble, right? So that's why I'm very passionate about what Donald Trump's doing. I've been following it pretty closely, as you guys can tell, and as a small business owner. I think it's time. I think it's time to empower the middle class. We empower the middle class, let them keep more of their money. By default, everybody's going to do better. The everything's going to change culturally. I firmly believe. You know, I think it's time to have a small business uh, renaissance, and I do believe it's possible under this new leadership.
I
Crazy enough, though, in the 70s, the middle class was driving the economy essentially. And now it's the upper class who has kind of control over it. But Daniel, go ahead, and you had something to say. So
Yeah, Peter. Wow, everything just said. You're a pretty good businessman. You're entrepreneur at heart. You're pretty good business minded. I'm pretty sure if you and I we started a business, it'll flourish in the state of California.
Praise God.
And me personally, living in California is really expensive. And one of the things that people know about, the average Californian knows about, that in California is one of the most highest tax,
yep.
in income tax in the whole state of the country. And regarding that, there's allegations regarding Newsom, California Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom, that using Californian dollars, allegedly to help pay or donate into his wife's NGO. And I want to ask if you heard of it, what's your opinion about it? Give us your hot take.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I've heard about it. I haven't done a ton of homework on it, but I say in general, I mean, obviously, it looks like there's some kind of what is it called? Where you're basically, yeah, if it's a close family member benefiting from you being governor. That in and of itself should be heavily scrutinized. I mean, I don't see why the Secretary of State, why the Attorney General isn't at least investigating it, right? I mean, if there's any improprieties, that needs to be cleared. But regarding the NGO process, I've it's always assumed, and I'm going to generalize, right? Because I know that there's good people out there that want to start a movement for something good. I would encourage them not to be government dependent, because there are individuals out there that I am going to beat up on a little bit, and I've experienced this myself, that start an NGO, non-governmental organization, as a nonprofit, right? They declare 501c3. Um, and all of a sudden they're getting donations, right? But then before you know it, they hire someone that can maybe be really good at writing up grants, through a grant application process. Before you know it, they're getting government funds. Those government funds are really starting to trickle in. Before you know it, they think, we're high on the hog, so we can go ahead and spend this money. And sure enough, all of a sudden you have a CEO that's very high paid, and before you know it, the organization falls flat and they move on, or they change the name. Like, these kind of things become cyclical, and it's a waste. So there are people that are doing it for the wrong reasons, is my point. And I think that's why these there's got to be heavier scrutiny over the NGO process. I don't believe personally grant funds should be allowed to be given to NGOs. I think, if it's really a successful nonprofit, then your job should be to have enough passion and create enough passion for others to privately donate, so you're not dependent upon government funds. Because, as we've always learned, right, just in general, the moment government becomes an investor in anything, that very thing, basically just dies, right, and it becomes more of a money laundering opportunity than it becomes a benefit to the community. Technically, churches are 100% nonprofit, right, private, but we have thousands and thousands of churches all over the state and all over the country. So why do we have an NGO process that's easy to abuse? And one final point, we've been learning a lot. NGOs have been a big prime factor in creating problems with the immigration, as a specific example. That they're actually the ones that are coming up with these, these ultimately these processing centers, getting involved in, maybe supposedly distribution of food, but before you know it, they're giving instructions on illegals how to break the law, how to avoid ICE, how to avoid detention. Basically subverting the process. All the while, they're hurting our ultimately they're suppressing wages, is what I was trying to say. So it creates a fake economy, because it's under the radar economy, right? It's more black market. Before you know it, you're hurting local small business owners that are paying. They're very scrutinized publicly, right? Because everything's on the up and up, everything's publicly declared. A lot of these NGOs are able to get away with things that they shouldn't be.
No, definitely. But just to kind of keep it driving here, it's the gubernatorial race. It's kind of starting to heat up a little bit. I know it hasn't been really looked at or really watched right now. It's kind of early in the race, but what are your thoughts on it right now with who's running? I know the lieutenant governor said she was going to run. Now she's not running as of today. She wants to focus on the economy and the future of the economy. And I'm air quoting this because that can indicate anything. So, your thoughts?
When I heard her mention the economy, or I think I remember reading a quote, something about she wants to be involved in California's budget. I think she let the cat out of the bag. I think personally, there's so many moving parts to the politics, to the political reality of California. that you're seeing that I think correlates the dogfight happening with the redistricting sentiment right throughout the nation. Like Texas and the five districts that are now considerably more Republican. Um, but they're using a true argument because basically, as we've known, redistricting has supposed to been to protect certain groups, like supposedly like a Hispanic population group or whatever. But all it does is it creates more of a racial bias rather than anything else. And that's kind of what seems to be going through the court process. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to the issue of the jockeying by the lieutenant governor, it really is. I believe you're going to start to see now all of a sudden other people declaring that they're going to be kind of slowly going behind the door. Like now they're going to take the place of Miss. I forgot her name is a little bit complicated for me. Analakis or something like that. Eleni Analakis. So you're going to start to see this political jockeying where you're going to have high level Democrats shifting into these positions. I firmly believe Kamala Harris, kind of part and parcel. She's not going to be. She not. I knew she wasn't going to run for governor. I hope that she was personally. Donald Trump shifted the state of California 12 points specifically off of the Hispanic vote, and love it or hate it. But the reality is kind of a whiny lady and stuff is probably not the most appealing to the Hispanic base. So that's just kind of create, I think, a funny dynamic. But bottom line is, I really do believe there's going to be political shifts happening, things lining up. Right? You just had Gavin Newsom declare, or I think even the legislature, they're going to be redistricting themselves 5 supposed new Democrat districts. I say, as long as it's done well, I'm not okay with it for the reasons that they're saying. But to a certain extent, I firmly believe it's like something that's going to blow up in their face because they're already maxed out in their Democrat representation, right? We have 40% of the Republican base, yet 17% of the representation of the state that's Republican. That's already imbalanced. So I don't know how they're going to gather any more Democrat support. They're already losing it. In my county specifically, they lost 5% Democrats and they've increased, I think, 10% in Republicans. So we're seeing a big shift in our communities. I can't imagine it's any different in any other part of the state.
So you're telling me you don't want a governor who loves Venn diagrams?
I would prefer someone who actually, if they knew what that even was, when I'm, uh, then fine. You want to, but yeah, it's at that point she's just trying to look very smart, and I think that's a little bit not wise. Yeah,
Yeah,
she should, instead of
definitely.
trying to be smart, she should probably just do her homework.
You're funny, McKenna. You're very funny. So I
It's
got.
it's a running joke between my friends and I. So
I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure. So Peter, I got another hot take for you. So it's been circulating in the news, right? That Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom, he's essentially declaring war, state of Texas. Why? Because the state of Texas is they're saying they're going to redistrict, and so because of that, Gavin Newsom is declaring war in another state, in another U.S. state, and he wants to redistrict the congressional lines on the federal level. There's many things that Californians should know about that. First of all, so it for this special election, okay, it's going to cost Californian taxpayers about 240, 250 million of California taxpayer dollars. And on top of that, it's going to be somewhere between 5 million and 10 million of lawsuits costs against Gavin Newsom's proposed special election. So Californians want to know why does that have to be a special election? Well, I want to tell everybody here why is that about 10 years ago or so, on and around, California voters actually voted for a nonpartisan committee to approve new redistricting of congressional lines. So because Gavin Newsom's attempt is partisan and he's trying to bypass what voters voted for, the state of California voters voted for, bypass them. So that's why he's required to do a special election, and the most expensive special election in California history. And I want to know what's your hot take on all that I just mentioned. I know it's a big whopper right there. Give us your take. Thank you.
I mean, I personally think that Bring it on. I think it's going to end up creating a different dynamic that they didn't expect. I mean, last I checked, it's the U.S. Census Bureau that's in charge of the census, right? The federal government is in charge of the census. Granted, the elections process is handled at the local level or at the state level, um, but that still doesn't change the reality that the federal government is calling a census because they're looking to basically clean up the voting process. To a certain extent, we know that the gerrymandering not only has happened in these heavy Democrat states, the what is it, New York, California, Virginia, you have these states, and I think you even have one governor as a perfect example who I forgot exactly which state it was, but she basically said, "I'm gonna basically do," and she's kind of repeating what Gavin Newsom is saying, and I'm laughing hearing about it because she already doesn't have any Republican representation in her whole state, yet she's going to call basically for this whole thing to happen and or support it. My point is, you already have heavy gerrymandering in Democrat districts. So what are they going to say? We're going to double gerrymander this district? Like we're going to double down on gerrymandering, And oh, by the way, that means we're going to get a Republican to vote Democrat in order for us to win. You already are at your ceiling, guys. Like you've already gotten as far as you're going to get with Democrat support. The Republicans are at the floor. They have no. They have. As far as I'm concerned, they could just they can have they can burp, and then all of a sudden you get another Republican in a new seat, right? That's the reality of what's happening. There's so many things that are culminating. This whole redistricting fight, I think it's just political theater, right? They're just trying to maybe get their donor base excited so they can say, "Oh, I'm going to jump in the fight to help these guys." So maybe the temporary benefit and the only benefit would be that they raise money off of this whole conversation, but whether they actually win, who knows? My best guess is they're probably setting themselves up to fatten up their coffers, get ready to retire in their seats, especially these longtime folks that are like almost like dust in the Chuck Schumers of the world and stuff, and the Nancy Pelosi's, right? They're ready to move on, right? They just need to fatten up their nest egg a little bit more. Something is happening. I do believe that they're setting themselves up for failure. I firmly believe that they're expecting a Republican shift. Not Congress is set to gain more seats nationwide because of this conversation. The Democrats are they're trying to act like they're ready to be Marcus Aurelius, right? They're trying to pick a fight and think that they're going to be part of the 300 that's going to take on the Republicans. But the reality is they're more like the other guys on the other side of the team that are actually getting ready to be demolished.
And in my honest opinion, ultimately, I think the California voter is going to reject Gavin Newsom's proposed redistricting plan
Oh,
because
definitely. Well, I mean, Democrats know they're losing. That's the part of it too.
Yeah.
They know that whether that's federal or state level or local, they know that they don't have a hold that they used to have, essentially.
and agreed. And a lot of voters don't know about this, but there's a certain section that says it needs to be 120 days or more for something to be on the ballot. So because there is a Democrat supermajority in Sacramento, there's no one's going to stop them to bypass that 120-day loop, statement right there, because we're around 90 days, so they're going to bypass that, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
I'm
Go
curious if
ahead.
that's going to be. I'm curious if that's going to be a litigation element too, right? So who knows how much more litigation? Because you're right, and actually that's a good reminder, Daniel. Because I do remember. I mean, anytime I would run for office, it's there's all these different rules when it comes to signage and applying, and ultimately your declaration. There's a required element, even just for printing these ballots, right? There's so much process already baked into the cake. They're going to break process. What are they going to do that's actually going to make it cleaner when it's only gotten worse anyways? So can you imagine? It's like, hey, we're going to screw up our own elections process because we're going to ram this through. I don't see how they're actually going to benefit by ramming through a shorter than normal special election process, and an expensive process at that, which is going to be an amazing campaigning message for the Republicans going into the 26 elections.
Definitely. So that brings me to my next question, actually. Do you think Newsom's going to run for president? I mean, there's rumors that he is, and he's the top contender for the Democrat Party. I actually just saw prior to our interview tonight that JD Vance and Newsom are the top two to go head to head in 2028. Your thoughts?
So this is me maybe being hot take a little bit, but it's just a thought in my mind. You guys, your followers can maybe play it out, maybe question it, maybe say I'm dumb or whatever. Um, Personally, I think Donald Gavin Newsom will run for president at the same maybe equal chance that Donald Trump reruns for president. What I mean by that is Gavin Newsom's like his polling numbers are in the tank. He has no support, right? And for obvious reasons, not just the fact that she cackles, right? Kamala Harris, but she doesn't have the donor system for her to run. But you also have a president who dealt with a very heavy blow, which I think, as a Bible believing Christian, there's nothing new under the sun, and by default, there's also nothing without God's divine providence involved in it. So my point is, it could have been a blessing that President Trump didn't win because so many things had to happen in order for that election to play out the way it did. I experienced it locally. You saw the mass mail-in balloting during COVID. All of a sudden, this fast tracking of the law, right? There were so many things that basically played out where that election just seemed very, very questionable. I mean, I actually voted against the 2020 election, not because I'm an election denier, but actually because there was something very real happening in my county, which is happening in all counties, which is the adjudication rate, which has to do with the error rate, was so skewed. There's usually an average every election. It's just a couple percentage points, basically that usually has an error rate. But now with all of these ambiguous laws, it's actually made it easier for that error rate to be so skewed, and one can actually question whether it's cheating or anything else that could have been basically insidious in it. My point is, all of that said, Donald Trump, I'm curious. It's just a thought. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I don't know. But there's constantly jokes. There's even hats 2028, President, Donald Trump 2028. Um, Maybe this creates this process where now all of a sudden they're digging deep, almost forensically into the 2020 elections that might open up a lot of can of worm, big can of worms basically to really know what really happened during that time. And if that's the case, then who knows how many people technically are in seats that they don't belong in. That changes the electoral vote count. That changes the presidential vote count by default, or not the presidential vote count, but the electoral vote count for the president at that point. So there's so many dynamics that could play out where this thing could become pretty hot. And even if it isn't President Trump, he's obviously going to have a voice in this whole election process in 28. Uh, I'm excited to see, because the rest of the nation does not care for a Gavin Newsom. They just don't.
No,
He's
no.
crazy to Californians. Can you imagine, to a Texan or yeah, to some of these Rust Belt states that have been destroyed by that globalist sentiment? It's just the reality that, it's becoming more conservative. And one final point, you're seeing this happening nationwide, and I'm praising God for it. There's so much sentiment from even the agnostic or the atheist that are leaning in towards wanting a sense of stability. I would argue morally, because of the struggle session that's happened, because of all the ideological politics we've dealt with for years. It's not even been in the last 10 years. It's been since the 80s when all this stuff is shifting. So I'm a little bit of a student of history, but and in to that point, now more people are becoming not just Christians, but more faith driven, definitely more moving away from atheism. That's changing the sentiment towards the Democrat base, right? Because they're becoming crazier left. You got Mondami as their front runner in New York, and you got AOC as their potential front runner for president. Like, all of that creates a
It's
little bit of
crazy.
a different dynamic where you have two obvious opposite paradigms that are only growing, and they're not even, most people want, I would argue, for that divergence to close, for more meeting in the middle. It's seeming to be more splitting apart. Um, but I think the majority by default, right? The Constitution argues the majority wins. That majority right now seems to be more in the yeah, the conservative Republican, MAGA sentiment than definitely the progressive left.
Well, people saw. They saw what happened over the past 4 years. They were blinded by what they thought that they wanted. They thought what they knew because they didn't like certain things Trump did in his first term. Um, so I think with the 2020 election, a lot, whether that, and I could totally be wrong about this, I think over the next couple of years, a lot's going to come out
Mhm.
specifically about that. Because I know a lot of Americans, whether they deny it or not, know that honestly the election was probably stolen. I'm not going to confirm or deny my opinion about that, but a lot of people will say that election was stolen. So we'll have to see what comes out in the next several years, but
Yeah.
whether that means Trump is going to run for a third term, how that sets them up. I know we have a two-term system. A lot of people are alleging that a third term could be brought up. I don't know. I don't know how that works, but I guess to kind of wrap it up, Daniel, you want to go ahead and do that?
Yes, so I got a little bit of breaking news for everybody here. So, buckle your belts, everybody. So on August 7th, Thursday, all right, 2025, the city of Hoopa Valley, which is located in Riverside County, okay, the city council officially recognized and awarded a biological boy competing in girls' sports and winning. And the city council of Rupa Valley officially awarded this biological boy and beating and competing against girls and keeping girls out of the roster, out of lineups, out of opportunities, which like scholarships. So what I'm asking you, Peter, give us your hot take about that, and please let the people of California know what happened in Rupa Valley.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, I believe it's AB Hernandez, right? He's a biological boy who basically claims to be transgender. All they he won this, I guess this latest big competition. I can't remember which one it was, but he ended up basically winning, and so they wanted to celebrate him, right? And so this city council basically did that, and they gave him an award. But you're going to end up seeing, honestly, all they're doing is adding fuel to the fire, and creating division, because you can't, that transgender, the whole idea of supposedly supporting transgender and prioritizing transgender by default makes them higher exclusive, group wise, right? If you think about it, right, because there's so much priority, that there is kind of this sentiment of discrimination, and now you're seeing so much separation from. I mean, I think the simplest way to put it is the public doesn't feel represented anymore. Like, even for those that are maybe on the fence about it, or maybe they might even be sensitive to the transgender sentiment. And I would argue most conservatives are sensitive to it, including me, but not in the same way that the political left uses it as a football, right? I mean, I have no problem having a friendship or having a amicable relationship with someone, but that's another thing than it actually being forced down our throats and becoming policy. But my point is that is making them feeling like the public doesn't matter anymore, because the majority don't have this issue. I mean, if you look at it, it's a 90-10 issue, right? That means 10% of the community love it, and the other 90 don't. And that also means, because it's like 1 to 2% of the population that's transgender, it doesn't impact everybody, right? It impacts very few people, which means now the minority has a stronger voice than the majority. That's never been constitutionally or historically consistent. So that means more people are feeling like, yeah, my government doesn't care about me. Yeah, actually, they don't like me, right? Because even if I said, how about we not prioritize this? All of a sudden, I'm the bad person in the room, right? All of a sudden, I'm racist or whatever, or homophobe or transgender phobe or whatever they want to say, phobe. Um, and because of that very reason, they're probably the silent voters that are going to be coming out in 26 and changing this paradigm. I really do believe it. I mean, you're seeing a silent majority. Everybody was shocked when the Hispanic community voted 12 points. We were the highest vote shift in the whole country. 12 points, big shift. That means it was 12 negative, now it's 12 positive, right? It shifted that much from the Hispanic community. Why? Because they didn't listen to them, and I think this is the same thing. They're not listening.
Definitely. And I appreciate your remarks on that. But let's go ahead and give a good close. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. I just want to give you a big thank you for that. But how can people know who you are, follow what you do? What's your social media?
So yeah, I'm at Hernandez for Congress. Although I am going to be running local, I would argue I'm basically putting my irons in the fire at the local level. I have a lot of bones to pick with our state legislature. Um, but bottom line is, yeah, they can go at Hernandez for Congress. I'm about to bring back my county supervisor seat. I'm running for San Benito County Supervisor in District 3, which is within the city limits of Hollister. And yeah, you can also go on Hernandez for Congress. That's my current website. It's about to be changed to be Supervisor Peter Hernandez for Supervisor Peter for Supervisor 2026. So that's probably, but the easiest way right now is on all my social media handles at Hernandez for Congress.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you guys.
We
God bless.
appreciate you.
This was fun.